Hello everyone, and welcome to a February Lunch and Learn for the Florida Native Plant Society. I'm Valerie Anderson, the Director of Communications and Programming. I have with me Jordan Parker, aka JPCharisma, located in the Tampa area, to give us a great presentation on butterfly gardening. Now, it's the start of Black History Month, so that's really exciting for us, and we're looking forward to this presentation. Another thing we have going on, we have our conference coming up in April 2nd through 6th. The room block is sold out. So I'm sorry if you were hoping to stay at the Hilton in Gainesville, it's not going to happen. Um, and the rooms that are left are very expensive. But there are other hotels in the vicinity, so please consider um, looking around for other accommodations. The conference, however, is not yet full. Registration is still open. The early bird rate is over. It ended on the 31st. But it's an exciting slate of speakers, workshops, socials. We always have a great time. So that's fnps.org/conference. If you're in the Gainesville or north of the Gainesville area, you can come to the Florida Trail Festival tomorrow. Florida Native Plant Society, myself, will be tabling, and Susan Carr will be leading a hike. So that's most of our upcoming events. Please check our calendar for chapter events, fnps.org/calendar. And yeah, that's all of our announcements. So Jordan, take it away.
Hey everybody. So today we're going to be doing my presentation, Butterfly Landscaping for the Real Florida. And basically I'm just an experienced entrepreneur specializing in native plants since 2019. I worked at a native nursery and then a landscaping company. And then I kind of went on my own path. So a lot of what I've learned has been through my own hands-on experience working within my own garden, as well as learning through my previous jobs. And a lot of the stuff in the presentation will be credited. If there isn't stuff that's not credited, then we will definitely credit it later. And we're just going to jump right into it. So this is a quote that I kind of reiterated. So most people will say like, the secret is not to chase butterflies, but to plant beautiful plants in your garden. Well, the correct thing is to plant native host plants in your garden and they will come to you. So the two key elements for landscaping for butterflies, the first one being is plant identification. It is one of the key elements in, creating your wildflower garden, understanding what plants you need to remove, as well as what plants you need to start incorporating in your yard. Because if you don't know what those plants are and you're not able to identify them, then you won't be able to correctly start your garden or maintain it. So you can't have the butterflies without the plants. So in this image right here, the top one is a landscape that I designed. We prepared the space. We cleared a lot of the stuff. So you can kind of see like if you have nothing, plants won't be there. But then this is about a year after the installation. And this is how it turned out. So there's a mixture of many different wildflowers and grasses and host plants and nectar plants. So that way we can attract butterflies. And so why are plants important? So butterflies need both host and nectar plants. Host plants are where the butterflies lay their eggs. Caterpillars feed on these host plants, and then nectar plants provide food for the adult butterflies. So you just want to combine a mixture of host and nectar plants for a thriving butterfly garden. And so colorful gardens attract plants and butterflies. And essentially like different color flowers in my experiences will attract different butterflies. So like if you have yellow, you might see some of the smaller butterflies headed towards there, whereas red, you're going to get your swallowtails, you're going to get the butterflies that are a lot larger and are looking for something fast. And so definitely remember to survey your property, which is going to kind of go on to the next thing. But the second key element is butterflies are more than beauty. They're indicators of a thriving ecosystem. And so they serve a better purpose than just looking pretty. Essentially, butterflies are not mainly here to pollinate flowers, but they're also going to be a part of the food chain. And so typically, most people know that monarch butterflies are pretty toxic, but we're just using the monarch as an example because everyone knows it. And so essentially, the butterfly is just nectaring, living as long as it can, and it's going to be laying a ton of eggs. So that way the caterpillars will make it eventually into butterflies. And so a lot of the butterflies that you see are the ones that made it versus the ones that have been laid. And so it's just going to start off from the plant, which would be their host plant, milkweed, then the caterpillar, then a wasp might eat the caterpillar, and then a tufted titmouse may eat the wasp. And so about 10% of butterflies make it to adulthood, and about 10% of the energy that is transferred from the host plant to the caterpillar is absorbed. And so these are a primary source of energy for many other animals. And so when you create your butterfly garden, you really want to look at it more so as a habitat rather than we got to catch them all, but we can still catch them all. So here are 5 steps for planning a successful butterfly garden. So the first one is surveying your property. You want to understand what you already have, determine, everything that's in your space, look at historical photos and maps of your natural landscape, use historical resources. Basically, what surveying is going to do is it's going to give you a good idea of what habitat was once there previously to whatever your current landscape is. And so that will give you a good route onto what type of plants and what type of habitat you're going to be trying to recreate. And so the second step is the design. So now that you know, after surveying what was going to work in your space and what was historically there, when you're designing, you will be able to incorporate high maintenance plants, low maintenance plants, and figure out what areas you want to put those plants. And so in my definitions of high maintenance and low maintenance, these are just things that I kind of think about before I incorporate these plants into a landscape. And so for me, high maintenance plants are choosing herbaceous plants like wildflowers that, they need a lot of upkeep, especially if you're in an area that wants a more manicured garden. So I try to choose plants that I know, even when they complete their life cycle, they're still gonna be attractive. And so by looking at some of these definitions and understanding that, before you just buy a plant, if you kind of have experience looking at that plant through its entire life cycle and like maybe seeing other people's gardens, that can help you to create something that is going to sustain your needs, because not everybody wants a high maintenance garden. They may want something that's a little bit more low maintenance. And I think one of the parts of the definition for what I have on low maintenance that really, helped me out when I was gardening is making sure that I am planting stuff that grows slow, and making sure that when I'm placing these plants, they're not going to be in the middle of like a pathway or somewhere where the plant could become an inconvenience. And so by choosing those plants, that's going to help you in the longevity of your space. And the last thing, create a true habitat, which kind of goes back to surveying. And then budgeting. So budgeting is crucial and it is important because, everybody wants that beautiful butterfly garden. But if you're not able to kind of think about the budget, then you're not really going to know where to start, if that really makes sense. Because a lot of times when I'm working with clients, everyone wants this amazing, beautiful butterfly garden. But when it boils down to the budget, I'm not saying that we cannot incorporate those plants. It's more so of kind of helping you onto the next step that we're going to get into. But knowing your budget is going to give you a good idea on what to start with. So you can start with seeds, you can do 4-inch pots, you can do donated plants. And by knowing what your budget is, it's going to help you have an idea for where you can locate those particular plants that you want to incorporate in your garden. And one thing that I put in there is that smaller plants, at least for me, I noticed they do a better job at establishing and acclimating to your area. And so write up a plan of execution. So all of the steps, like steps 3 2, and 1, they all come together for step 4. So now that you've surveyed your property, you figured out what type of space your property once was, then you did step 2 and step 3, where you did the budgeting and the design. That is where you put it all together. And because you know your budgeting, you know what your design is, you know what plants you're going to use, you will be basically writing everything down before you do it. Because I don't know about you, but me, whenever I don't write things down and I keep it in my head, then it ends up never getting done. And so if you write up a plan, that's going to further affirm your actions to actually finishing and completing your garden. And I just find it a very crucial step. And so number 5 is picking plant quality is super, super important. It is really, really important. Some of this will be said later again. But right now, because we're in the first 5 steps, just to keep it easy, I just want to say picking plant quality is super, super important, because if you have healthy plants, then it's going to make it a much more successful chance at incorporating that plant into your space. And so let's go into the other slides that kind of talk about this point. So choosing a healthy young plant for success. As you can see, this is Corky Stem Passion Vine. And so it's easier to plant directly into the ground. It's going to reduce your environmental impact, especially if you choose those smaller plants and those younger plants that are healthier. They're going to have a better time establishing into the garden. And so next slide. So this is what I mean by choosing a high quality, healthy plant. So I was able to basically put the plant in my hand upside down, then lift up the pot. And so you can see these root systems. I know a lot of people may think that you're buying a pot of dirt, but that is not what you're buying. You're buying a plant that is getting ready to outgrow that pot, because you can see these roots are white. So those are healthy roots. And that's letting you know that those roots are looking for more nutrients, looking for more space, looking for more water. And if you get a plant that looks more like this, it is going to have a better chance at establishing into your space and being a more successful plant installation versus, buying something that is more root bound. But we're going to get into that later. So as you can see, it has white, firm roots. There's no brown. And like I said, you gently want to check your plant, because a lot of times when you go into the nursery settings, they're trying to sell beautiful plants. I understand it's very important. Everybody wants beautiful plants at the end of the day. But buying younger plants that are in the conditions like this is going to be a much more successful plant choice versus buying something that is overgrown out of a pot and looks big. A lot of the times, those plants that are overgrown and in the pots, their roots do not look like this. They're typically root bound, and we can discuss later how to mitigate root bound plants. And so this is it's not dead, it's dormant. So this is pink swamp milkweed right here. Pink swamp milkweed, it is a dormant plant. And the reason why I'm saying it's not dead, it's not dormant, is because you can see these nice roots. So that is where the energy is being stored of the plant. And once the plant knows that it's in the right conditions of it's going to be hot and there's going to be continuous rainfall, it's going to pop up like on the other pot where the pink swamp milkweed already broke its dormancy. So if you think that your dormant plants are dead, they're not, they're alive, and they are still storing energy in their root system. So one thing to learn here is the root system is a key critical component in making sure you have a healthy plant. All right, so now let's get into planting for butterflies seasonally. There are many more butterflies in the state of Florida, but I just want to cover some common ones that are found within a garden setting. And so why planting for seasons is important. Planting seasonally is important because there are certain butterflies that are migratory and only have a short window. They are actively breeding in Florida. Majority of the butterflies in Florida are residential, but are still a few small exceptions. So basically, it's very important to have different plants at different seasons, because it's basically a window of opportunity. So In the slide, I have spring blooming plants like this skullcap. I have fall blooming plants like this blazing star and goldenrod. And then I have summer blooming plants like this pink swamp milkweed. And then this last one right here is going to be your climbing aster, which is more of a late fall, winter blooming wildflower. And by having those different windows, you're going to be attracting those butterflies that come during that season to your space because you have the habitat that they rely on, which would be the host and nectar plants. So here are some of the winter/spring migratory butterflies. I say this because I have personally seen red admirals in my own garden around November, December. And then that generation of red admirals will end up being the ones that are flying in the spring. And sometimes it happens with the cabbage whites and American ladies as well. It just kind of depends on if the season is warm or not. And then for the question mark butterfly, what's kind of cool about this one is that the question mark butterfly will overwinter as an adult butterfly. And so depending on how the season is as well, if it's warmer or cooler, it might pop out and you might see question mark butterflies. And so here are some spring blooming wildflowers. We have your prunus genus, so that's your flatwoods plum, your Chickasaw plums, you have your coreopsises, tixies, you have thistles. I was going to put blueberry, but I put sparkleberry because at least what I've noticed out in the field is there will be plants in that family, the blueberry genus, the vaccinium, and I won't see too many butterflies use plants in the vaccinium genus as a nectar source, but I do see sparkleberry being utilized the most. And I think a lot of it has to do with the shape of the flower per se. The sparkleberry flower is a little bit more open and it gives them a little bit more easier access to get to that nectar. And I just thought this was a cool photo. This one's by Trudy the Fleabane. You can see that this is a Phaon crescent at the top right. And then the bottom left is a pearl crescent. And they're a little bit different. What I can tell the difference is that there is the cream right here on the Phaon. That is a marking that I look for on the butterfly to identify that it is a Phaon crescent, whereas the pearl does not have that cream marking. So just another thing to take into consideration with butterfly gardening is learning to look at those markings. And so here are some spring through early fall butterflies, the swallowtails. Everyone loves them. They're a lot bigger. These butterflies, they are more, I see more of them in the summertime. I was going to put this as a summer butterfly, but you will see these butterflies in the spring all the way until the fall. But they're one of the first ones to start to go away once the season starts to become cold and we head into fall and winter. So here are some summer, early fall blooming wildflowers to also incorporate in your space. Some of my favorites are definitely going to be your mist flowers, your ironweeds, narrow leaf yellow top. I kind of have some mixtures of plants in here because with the yellow top, that's going to be more coastal. Summer farewells, more inland. Mist flowers, more of like a wetland species. And then the ironweeds, they can be pretty adaptable depending on which species you get. And so a lot of this is just so you know that there's different ones and you want to get those plants that are going to work for your space. And so this one is a little bit debatable. I don't want to get too far in depth into it. But mourning cloaks, they do come to Florida occasionally. And as you can see in the quote by Glassberg, mourning cloaks may occasionally breed in northern Florida, but most adult species found here have been believed to be winter migrants from farther north. Essentially, sometimes we will get this butterfly. It has a pretty large range and it does come into Florida, but mainly around the Panhandle. And it has been seen in Kissimmee Prairie State Park as well. So it is very cool. I love this butterfly so much because it's also one of the few overwintering butterflies. So it will be an entire butterfly in the winter and you'll get the chance to see it. With the monarchs, okay, so this is where it gets a little controversial. So the monarchs, historically, in a historical context, let's kind of zoom out. In historical context, the monarch butterfly was really supposed to be here as a migratory butterfly. And unfortunately, because of introduced milkweed species, they have started to create a residential population. So this is a photo from Andy Davis. He has a lot of information if you want to go more in depth about that. But on the left, these are the migratory monarchs. That's the size of them. They're going to have larger wings. They're going to have more white spots, and they're just overall a deeper color. Whereas on the right, these are residential monarchs. And those are typically not the monarchs that were once here. There's definitely a lot of information that I have been wanting to get into. But essentially, another thing that I could have made a slide on now that we're talking about it, but sometimes we will get butterflies from like the Caribbean to spill over into South Florida. All right, and so here are some fall/winter blooming wildflowers. You have your blazing stars, your palafoxias, you have your mints, your goldenrods, and your true asters. These are all amazing plants. I would definitely say that the mints are underrated. That is I think it's the big flower false rosemary. And that one, it just has such a pretty big bloom. And as you can see, this is a Palamedes swallowtail utilizing it. They're just so underutilized because a lot of the times people are like, I want a blooming winter plant. And that is just one of the plants that has really pretty foliage. It has those gorgeous blooms. And the mints will also bloom sporadically throughout the season as well. And so here are some of our year-round butterflies. So when I was talking about, butterflies that kind of come in from the Caribbean, I was more so directed towards the malachite. So the malachite was actually not documented until 1961. And then it started creating its own population here. However, a lot of Lepidopterists, they are able to identify the difference between our Florida population that was created and the populations that were created in Cuba based upon their genetics. And so we do have native plants here that they can utilize as well for their caterpillars. But these are just some of the butterflies you will see year round here in Florida. One thing that I kind of wanted to kind of touch on while I'm here and the butterflies are being seen. So the Gulf fritillary, the common buckeye, and the cloudless sulfur, they all have periods where they spike in population sizes. So around fall, you will see a spike in Gulf fritillaries and cloudless sulfurs because those two are actually semi-migratory butterflies. They're not like monarchs that are going to create 5 generations and travel from Canada all the way down to Mexico. But these two, they kind of follow the weather. So when it gets a lot warmer, the butterflies are going to start going all the way from, Florida and other southern regions and then make their way upward. And then during the fall months, they start coming back down because it's becoming a lot colder. Oh, and for the buckeye, we typically will see a larger spike in buckeyes around springtime because a lot of the host plants that they utilize pop up. So that's why it's important to plant those seasonal variety plants in your space. And so here are some year-round bloomers: tropical sage, tea bush, scorpion tail, button sage, lantana. I did not make a slide to emphasize scorpion tail or tropical sage, but I will say those two are very common plants to find. They're very easy to incorporate in your garden, and just take into consideration at how aggressive they can be. Personally, for me, when I have these in a landscape setting, I just weed out the ones that don't look as aesthetically pleasing, and I keep the ones that do. All right, so this is a key thing people do not look at when they are gardening. structure and plant community. So back when I talked about surveying your property, this is a part of what I meant by surveying your property and looking at some of the historical photos. Because if you are able to look at the historical photos, know what kind of plant community it is, you will know what type of plants to utilize within your space, within that community that was once there. And so your building structure, rather than fighting to make things work in your landscape, by creating that community of plants, it's going to have a better success rate at making a sustainable garden. And so I'm kind of looking at these plant types as tools. And so when we were looking at the plant community and all those different layers, we are looking at trees, shrubs, wildflowers, grasses, vines, and ground covers as like, try to think of the landscape as a canvas. And so when you're creating it, you will use these plant types as the paintbrush of painting how your landscape is going to look on that canvas. And I was thankfully allowed to use these images by the people that are put on the screen. And they basically had these images and they gave me the rights so that way I could help to promote why it is important to plant these native plants in your space to provide host plants for these butterflies. And so these are beautiful illustrated photos and images, and I just absolutely adore their work. So definitely look at these plants as paintbrushes when you are designing your landscape. And so let's start off with the trees. So one thing about trees that people kind of overlook is what their understories look like. So on the left, we're looking at an oak understory, and that's going to create a partial to part shade microclimate. That means there's going to be plants that can only live within those conditions. So knowing when you plant an oak tree, you're only going to be limited to a select number of plants, especially as that tree grows and becomes bigger and creates more and more shade. Whereas a pine trees are going to stay around partial shade microclimates. And I personally love pine trees because of this. And we're going to kind of touch into that a little bit later as well. But if you plant a pine tree, then you'll have more sun, which will allow more wildflowers to live under it. And so here are some trees that we will be talking about and discussing. The wild cherry, it's one of my favorites. It's a host plant to the tiger, swallowtail, and red spotted purple. Those are two that were on one of my wild cherry trees. It is definitely a easy tree to incorporate in your landscape, especially if your region habitat was where that this tree is naturally found in. So if you live in a sandhill, if you live in a secondary woods or old fields or upland hardwood forest, you can definitely incorporate this tree into your space to host red spotted purple and tiger swallowtail butterflies. The next tree is the Carolina willow. So the Carolina willow is going to be found more in wet regions, and it is a pretty aggressive plant. Keep that in mind. The root system on a willow is going to be searching for water, so it could harm some of your water pipes. So it's definitely an amazing host plant. You can, incorporate this in your garden. I will have some more pieces of how you can do that in the butterfly hack section. And then we have the red bay tree. This tree, it is an amazing host plant. It's going to host two butterflies at the same time, the spice bush and the Palamedes swallowtail. But keep in mind that this tree is susceptible to laurel wilt, and they are currently still studying how they are going to be treating the fungus that is destroying these trees that is being spread by the ambrosio beetles. So it's definitely a nice plant to have, but keep that in mind and definitely make sure if you are sourcing this plant to only source it in your area and do not expand out of that, because if you try to bring in this plant from other regions, you could possibly spread the ambrosio beetle that has that nasty fungus that is harming the laurel trees. Winged elm. This is an underutilized plant. It can be used as a street tree. One thing that is cool about this plant is that it is a host plant to the question mark and the morning cloak butterflies. It does really well in dry settings, and it is very adaptable to being walked under with that impacted soils. And you can see Jenny Stimble, that's hers that she planted, and it just has that beautiful pyramid structure. Now let's talk about shrubs. So textured shrubs as wild host plants in the garden, as well as the textures. And so you have wild lime, saw palmetto in its green form, and you have fiddlewood right here. And by having those different leaf textures, it's going to give you a more refined space with less clashing. Because if you have shrubs that have these different, saw palmetto with a big wide palm frond, and then your tiny circular leaf wild lime, and then more of like your larger leaf fiddlewood, that's going to give you differences in textures, and the shrubs aren't going to all just kind of melt together. They're all going to kind of stand out on their own, and you'll be able to see the significance in the differences of the plants. And so saw palmetto is one of my favorites. It is a host plant to the palmetto skipper and the monk skipper. As you can see, this is the silver variety. And the silver variety, this is actually a picture from Bach Tower Garden. And the silver variety gets a lot bigger, a lot faster. So if you do incorporate the silver variety in your space, it will give you that nice clash of color versus all the other greenery. And it's just it's one of those low maintenance plants that I was talking about earlier, because it grows relatively slow to moderate. If you do incorporate in your space, as I say in this slide, I prefer doing a 10-gallon instead of a 3-gallon, because when it has that larger root system at the 10-gallon phase, it will be able to establish a lot faster within your space and then give you more new growth. Versus having a 3-gallon or a seedling, which is going to take God knows how long. So definitely try to go for a bigger size pot when it comes to this plant. All right, now we're talking about firebush. Firebush is amazing. This is a commonly utilized plant that they are incorporating in more public areas. This was just in an apartment complex, and I was like, oh my God, it's a firebush. So I took this quick picture of it. And as you can see, I think that this one is the cultivar variety. However, the true variety you can grow from seed can kind of give you this look as well if you continue to chop it back. But the firebush, what's so great about it is that it can stay within these small regions, be cut back constantly, and maintained to this shape, and still provide amazing nectar for your butterflies. And so another underutilized plant is flatwoods plum. The reason why I'm saying flatwoods plum and not Chickasaw plum is because this size plant, when it gets bigger, it doesn't do as many runners as your Chickasaw plum. And I'm going to try to speed through this because how long do we have, Valerie? An hour?
Yeah, I try and keep it to like 50 minutes because people start dropping off. I mean, and then we got to handle questions as well.
Okay, well, there's a lot of plant suggestions, so I'm gonna click through these because there's like 109 slides, so let's just do that. So wild lime is a good one, host plant. You can look back at the video and you can get all the suggestions. Button sage lantana, great year-round bloomer, nice texture, beautiful flowers. Bahama senna, host plant, evergreen. I think it's prettier than the other senna, which is going to be your privet. I think the Bahama senna is a lot more gorgeous. It's a little bit more refined. Just plant it. It does fine. It reseeds if it dies back in the winter. Tea bush, amazing. This is a viceroy on it, as you can see. It's more coastal, just like how the Bahama senna was. It blooms year-round. Butterflies absolutely love it. Bees love it. Don't put it around your sidewalks or walkways. Bees are going to be there, so keep that in mind. Wildflowers and grasses. So different shaped flowers attract different sized butterflies. As you can see, This is a hair streak on a smaller size flower. And then this is a giant swallowtail on a firebush flower. So having those different shaped flowers and sizes will attract those different butterflies. And so starry rosinweed, amazing, super easy beginner plant to add into your space if you want that showy yellow flower. And then we have Chapman's goldenrod. I put Chapman's because I like that this plant can stand upright on its own. It stays a lot smaller and it's less aggressive in its root system compared to Seaside goldenrod. Spike blazing star, that one's a good one. This plant, I like this plant because at least from the vendor that I get this plant from, it can withstand a lot drier conditions than what it is said on the Florida Native Plant Society. So I just like the refined look of Liatris spicata, and it's just so showy and refined. Purple thistle, that's a great one. Seed heads are great for birds, and the multi-composited flowers have multiple flowers, so it can just sit there and nectar on that one plant and get all the nectar it needs because of the multiple flower spikes or flowers that are in there. Like these little purple things, those are individual pieces of the flower that they are touching to get to the nectar in the flower. Silk grass, that's a great one. It is great for more inland settings, really dry areas, and it reseeds pretty decently if you incorporate a couple plants. You don't really need too many. Many flower beard tongue, super underutilized plant. This plant needs to be planted in more landscapes that are full sun and dry. But take in mind how your conditions are during the rainy season, because this plant's going to want more well-draining soil. So if you have well-draining soils, then it will probably make it through the rainy season. Oh, and then it's also evergreen. Keep that in mind. There's not a lot of evergreen wildflowers. Frost flower, super underutilized as well. So many different butterflies love this plant because nothing else is really blooming at the time this plant is blooming. So they're going to all just go straight to the frost flower. And it's great because it loves to be in those shady environments. Seaside ageratum, this is more coastal, great plant. The alkaloids in the plant are what are going to attract the male butterflies. So having this is super helpful because they need those alkaloids to hopefully pair with a mate. Wildflowers need their grasses. So this is an image from Lily Bird. This one is from the Florida Wildflower Foundation. And then I think this is another picture from Lily. And so I was just trying to show how the wildflowers are naturally found within those pine understories and they're along grasses. So I was trying to find a picture, but when the wildflowers are missing their grasses, they're going to be lopsided and fall over. So you want to plant grasses so that way they can keep the wildflowers up because they have that relationship with the grasses. So this is a great grass to incorporate, chalky blue stem. It has that gorgeous color, as you can see, has beautiful inflorescence when it is blooming, and it's just not a high maintenance grass. It's more minimalistic out of the grasses. Purple love grass is a high maintenance grass. It gets really big and it can reseed really, really aggressively, which is what makes it more high maintenance. But it is a great versatile grass and it's very easily accessible. Elliott's love grass, that's almost like purple love grass, except for it is a little bit more salt tolerant. It has more of that chalky bluish kind of hue to it. And in more drier settings, it stays smaller like this. And when it's in full sun, it really gets that nice chalky color. Pineybush dropseed, very underutilized plant. This is in the front of my meadow right here. That's where I put it because this plant kind of stays in place. With my experience, I haven't seen it really like heavily reseed in my yard, but others have said that it does reseed like moderately. So keep that in mind when incorporating it. You might need to plant a little bit more if you want to have more of a sustainable landscape. Split beard blue stem, very underutilized. The inflorescence on this plant is gorgeous, is outstanding. I took this picture in one of my friend's yards. She has had success of this plant reseeding in her own garden. And most of the grasses that I have posted in here are not super fire dependent. Vines. So vines, they're great for maximizing biodiversity within your space. You could put them on arbors, trellises. Some vines can even be used as a ground cover. So we have maypop passion vine. There is the purple, and then there's the white variety. This is native. This was a plant that was from a wild area that was ethically collected and put in someone's garden, and they were able to grow these white variety of the native Passiflora incarnata. It's just gorgeous. It's stunning. It can be used as a ground cover and climb on things, and it's going to host you 3 different butterflies and provide you fruit. So we have the white flowered passion vine. This one is my favorite, the Passiflora multiflora. Does better in shady environments. It is pretty adaptable to drier settings, but it's going to want to stay in more shade if that's the case. And the reason why I love this plant so much is because the Gulf fritillaries don't love it as much as they do the maypop. So you get the chance to have your vine grow and host zebra longwing and Julia butterflies, because those ones, everyone loves them. Florida State butterfly is the zebra longwing. And if you incorporate this, then they're going to be the ones to have something to use like this vine and not, have nothing because the Gulf fritillaries ate up your other passion vine. So spurred butterfly pea, this is a great one. It's a sprawler. You can kind of put this in more of like a meadow or like wild garden setting. It's not the most manicured, but it is definitely kind of high maintenance because it reseeds and it grows super, super aggressively. Twine vine, great backup plant if you have milkweed in your garden and you need your monarch caterpillars to eat something. This is a great plant. And it is also a host plant to the queen butterfly and the soldier. So if you plant it and you're more in South Florida, South Central, you may host soldier butterflies as well as queens. But queens are pretty much everywhere. They go all the way to North Florida, all the way to South. So it's a great plant to have if you want to attract queens because they prefer the milk vines over the milkweeds. And then this is Florida milk vine. I love this plant. It's endangered. It's gorgeous. You can see that maroon color. It's pollinated by beetles, and it is found in more like sandhill environments and drier xeric settings. And it just has a really pretty leaf shape to it as well. Ground covers are great. They help maximize diversity as well and to help fight erosion. And you can use them to replace your lawn. So we have beach verbena. I wouldn't use this one technically for lawn replacement, but rather where this one is planted, I have it kind of in the front of my garden bed. And so it has that nice showy greenery and purple blooms. And I absolutely love this plant because of how profusely it blooms in the springtime. And I see the swallowtails use it when they freshly eat cloves and come out their chrysalis. They're searching for nectar. And this is one of the few plants that is blooming so profusely and is just attracting them to your space. And it is salt tolerant. So for those of you that are located in more coastal settings, and it is native to your area, because we do have another one that's Tampa verbena. I personally have experienced that plant, and it was not as successful as beach verbena was for me. Rayless sunflower, super underutilized. You can see in the picture on the right, it has this huge, copious amounts of blooms on it. Those are not dead seed heads. Those are blooms. Tiny skippers love them. Gulf fritillaries love them. And then on the right, you can see that it is this cool ground cover that is growing on the side of a hill and a slope. And so these wildflowers are typically found in more of like a pine flatwoods area that's very seasonally wet. But because of the sandy soils, it has that well drainage. So if you put it in a space where it's not going to be like a rain garden per se, but like a little bit less wet than that, it will do really, really well in that space. So it's a very adaptable species. It's not super fire dependent. And if you wanted to continue to show up in your garden, plant lots of them, 8 or more. Blue porterweed, super easy ground cover one as well. It attracts your smaller and larger butterflies at time to time, depending on what they're feeling like doing, because butterflies are more of opportunists. So definitely plant this one. Super easy, reseeds, grows from cutting super easily. It's somewhat salt tolerant. Some people are saying it's not that salt tolerant. Some people are saying it is. I like it. It's a great plant. I have it in 9B, even though it's out of its zone, but it is super easy, super manageable, and definitely a top one to add to your space. Water hyssop, that's a good one as well. If you're in a very, very wet region, you're going to host the white peacock butterfly. I have seen it on the sides of like mangrove areas. So I believe it is a little bit salt tolerant, but it does bloom year round, and you just get to see that gorgeous butterfly. And so best practices for planting, let's dive into it. So installing plants, always dig your hole 2/3 bigger than the size of the pot to allow enough space to backfill dirt. But also when you do that, you're making the soil less compacted. So that allows the root systems to expand outward at a faster rate. Also, in this picture, I'm not sure if you can really see this, but if you look really, really closely, so this is like the stem of the vine right here. And then there's a tiny root right there. This soil level is level with the actual soil. And so because you are able to see that root, you know that the root system is not being suffocated and it is able to absorb enough oxygen while it is being established. All right, correcting root bound plants. So this is kind of why I put it here instead of putting it at the beginning. You want to buy plants that you don't have to correct root boundness from. So here's some pictures. So where on the right, where you see this root bound plant, that's really not that bad. The roots aren't mushy, they're not brown, you're not really seeing their lateral roots. Those roots are really searching for water. And you can just kind of remove some of the roots so that way they will start searching to expand outward elsewhere. Whereas on the right, this is a longleaf pine that my friend Jennifer is correcting the roots on. And that is what happens. So longleaf pines, they kind of typically stay in that grass stage and they're putting all of their energy into the roots. The roots are the most important part of a plant. So if you're able to correct the roots, make sure you get that lateral root all untwined and everything, then you will have a better chance at establishing it. And so this is another image of a plant in a nursery pot, and they just kind of grabbed the plug, shoved it in a pot, and all these lateral roots are entangled and are not going the right direction. So at the end, after she untangled all of the roots, she spread them outward. Roots grow outward. They're not trying to grow super downward unless they're specific plants like your longleaf pines. Things that have large, deep tap roots will grow downward. It just depends on what ecosystem you live on. But typically speaking, plants like this plum, this flatwoods plum, are going to grow more outward. And you want to, when you get the roots out, you want to spread them outward when you plant them and make sure that that root ball is, you plant it high, it will never die. Plant it low, it will never grow. You want to see a couple of those lateral roots at the top. So then, well, not lateral, but some of the roots at the top of the root ball. So that way, you know, it's not being suffocated. And so transplanting, it's similar to dealing with root bound plants, except for you really don't want to mess with the root ball too much. You want to dig out as much dirt as you can and get as many roots as you can. And so if you dig wider, because those roots are going wider, you will have more roots for the plant to establish when you plant it into the next place. And the best time to do it is December through February. So you have a little time left before it gets scorching hot and those plants get shocked. Okay, and so now we have mulching. So in the images, I'm showing wood mulch versus pine straw. Wood mulch, you don't really want to mulch around the root system too much because you can suffocate those roots. The roots, the most important part of a good quality plant. So don't mulch super closely around those roots. Kind of lightly mulch around it. But with pine straw, what's good about pine straw is that it is very breathable. You can have reseeding wildflowers because of pine straw. You can mulch a lot thicker because of pine straw. Water moves through those pine needles because of pine straw. So it's going to sit there. It's not going to move around when there's like lots and lots of rain. So if you're going to mulch, I preferably like to use pine straw because it is more sustainable. And for, you know, your wood mulches, I try to use Melaleuca mulch because you're helping the environment while you're mulching your garden. So establishing your plants, you want to water those plants for 2 weeks every other day. The reason why I'm saying that is because I'm trying to encourage those root systems to search for water. So if you plant them deeply every other day, especially at this time of the season, you will have less watering that you have to do in the future because those roots are searching for water rather than staying at the top. Because if you water shallowly, then those roots aren't going to be searching for water because they know the water's right there at the top at the level. So water your roots deeply, and you can water them every other day. You can water them every day if it's during the summertime, and that's when there's a lot of water loss, but water your plants deeply. And most times you don't have to go further than 2 weeks unless it's a larger plant. So that is another thing to keep in mind. I probably should have put that in here, but if you have a plant that is like a 10-gallon or larger and it's like a tree, trees, they do not adapt or acclimate as well when they're bigger. When you buy them younger, they acclimate a lot faster, they grow a lot faster. It's just better to buy younger trees because you don't have to even worry about if the root systems are tangled and you have to break them all up. So that's why I said in the beginning, we got to do younger plants. Maintaining landscapes. So I prefer 7 to 11 a.m. because you don't have to fight with the sun. You know, it's cool, it's nice. You're not dealing with mosquitoes as much, depending on where you are. And it's just a more pleasurable experience. So on the left is during the morning time, and also in the morning time you get to enjoy the butterflies. Butterflies are enclosing at this time. They're just warming up their wings, so they're flying slow. You get to enjoy it. Whereas on the right, that's during the afternoon. Butterflies are flying faster. It's a lot warmer, but you are trying to get done as fast as you can because it's getting darker and you're not going to be able to see anything. And so the second best time is 4:30 to 7 p.m. 4:30 is like more springtime. When it's summer, you want to wait till 5. Effective weed management. So the best time is to suppress them during the winter months because you are essentially getting those weeds before they get a chance to explode and become bigger during our rainy season and during our dry season as well. It's just not a pleasurable time to be outside in spring once spring is heading towards summer. So you really want to get all that weeding done during the winter because it's going to help you in the long run. And like I said, weeding is a ongoing routine. It is not a one-time fix. So definitely keep in mind every morning, go out there, weed your garden, maintain your space so that way you can enjoy it and don't forget about it. Native host plants disguise as common garden weeds. So Florida pellitory, you can see that's a red admiral. She laid some eggs on this Florida pellitory right here. It is a common garden plant and you will see it. So keep it in mind, look for these leaves. It is a very pretty ground cover and it leaves by the time summer hits. So you don't really have to worry about it encroaching other plants. Rough fruit scale seed. Okay, I put this in here because a lot of people get this plant confused with mock bishop weed. Rough fruit scale seed, what I'm looking at is how spindly and long those stems are. Like it's not going to be super bushy like your mock bishop weed. And this plant is more tolerant to drought than mock bishop weed is. Oh, I wish I could go. Well, let me see if I can go back. So this is the mock bishop weed. So this is what mock bishop weed looks like when it pops up on the right, and then on the left, that's what it looks like when it's blooming. It has a very similar appearance, but it just is more bushier in general. And you're not going to see mock bishop weed in a full, dry, sunny location. You're not going to find mock bishop weed in a sandhill. You're just not. You'll see rough fruit scale seed, but you're not going to see mock bishop weed in a sandhill environment unless you're irrigating or something, or maybe there was enough rain for the season and it popped up, because a lot of these like pine flatwood regions that houses are built on, they have historically have had influxes of more rain or less rain. And depending on that, it will trigger these plants to pop up. So keep that in mind. Virginia pepperweed, super aggressive, but it hosts your checker white and great southern white butterflies. Super amazing plant to keep in small patches of because it is aggressive and it will reseed everywhere. Sweet everlasting. Okay, I had to put this in here because there is non-native plants that are called cudweed that also host the American lady butterfly, but sweet everlasting is one of the few native species that you can incorporate in your garden and is vouchered in every county. So this plant is not as aggressive as the other ones that people are seeing pop up. The smell is amazing. I went on a hike with the Magnolia chapter and the blooms on this are just like so sweet. It's a nice like fragrant scent, but it also hosts the American lady butterfly. So You want to get sweet everlasting and not the other one that you can just rip out. And then leave the leaves. You want to leave the leaves because many different organisms live within the leaves. You have your pupa, some larvae live in there. Butterflies might live in there, like your mourning cloaks and your question marks. Ladybugs and fireflies. Fireflies, they like to live in leaf litter. So if you leave the leaves alone, just leave them alone. They're going to break down. You're not going to see them later. It enriches the soil. Everyone's, being unsustainable, and you can just use leaves to enrich your plants. So leave the leaves. And then allowing plants to complete their life cycle. As you can see, these are 3 queens on a tropical sage that has completed its life cycle. I just let it live because many different animals utilize those dead sticks, like bees. Bees will create little pieces of habitat for their young ones. They are putting their larvae in the stems and stalks of those plants. And if you leave those dead sticks alone until, once it's about to hit summer, that's when I try to get rid of them. So get rid of them at that time, because these guys, these bees, if you want to save the bees, are living in those dead sticks. And so trimming plants, I look at trimming plants as a mechanical version of fire, if that makes any sense. So our natural season of fire is usually in March through April. So that is the natural time of disturbance for those plants. Plus, a lot of plants start breaking their dormancy. So you will know which parts of, let's say, your fringe tree or your fire bush that was dormant, you will know where to cut it, because you will see the new sprouts at the nodes and you'll be able to cut it around that time period. So you don't want to touch those dead stalks in the winter, like I said, because it's crucial habitat. And so you want to cut it about that far. Okay. And then landscaping hacks, you want to use that partial shade, because a lot of wildflowers can get away with being out of their zone if you put them in partial shade. Plant more than one herbaceous plant, because if you plant only one, if a butterfly comes and you only have one plant, it's going to eat it all down to the ground. And if you have multiple, you will have more chances of that plant thriving. And then coppicing. Coppicing is for those trees. So you have a small space, you can coppice that tree down. It's going to sprout a bunch of new growth, and then you can kind of trim and maintain that coppiced tree to the desired shape and size. And then container gardening. Container gardening, it's not as sustainable, so that is one drawback. But the good thing about it is you will be able to attract those butterflies with the host plants that they utilize, like Golden Alexander. It's more northern, but I have it in my garden because of a container gardening setup. False nettle, because of a container gardening setup. It's more mesic, so I'm more upland, so I have a container garden setup. And then woolly Dutchman's pipevine. Everybody wants the pipevine swallowtail. This is one of the only native host plants that's large enough to actually host enough. So a container garden works really well. All right, and so that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Jordan. That was excellent. People are up in the comments thanking you profusely. I would say the first question that we got was, can we have your presentation?
Well, I mean, this isn't technically my presentation. This was a communal effort of me learning from everybody who's posted on, Facebook groups. Like, Facebook groups are amazing. You can learn so much from Facebook groups, chatting, networking with people, getting them to allow me to use their photos to educate everybody. Having that community has been like super important in starting a native butterfly garden.
Okay, so we do have this recording. It's being recorded, so it will be available immediately after. You just go back to that link and rewatch whatever parts you want to watch. Anything you missed, anything we kind of went over too quick. So that's definitely available for everyone. And I would say the other 2 main questions people have is, like, where do I find these plants?
All right, the best thing that you can do is go on to Plant Real Florida. That is the public version of FAN's website that allows you to search for whatever particular plant you are looking for. So you will be able to look up in the search bar. You can either do it by plant or you can do it by location, and it will help you to get that access of information to really get the plant that you desire.
And that has like a directory of native plant nurseries for people to look at.
Directory of native plant nurseries. They have landscapers on there. A lot of different professionals are on Plant Real Florida.
Awesome. And then if people are looking for more specific information on plants for their region or ecosystems for their region, where would you recommend they go?
I can't remember the word for it, but I do know that there is like a historic map that Fan has created as well that shows the different like zoning of what ecosystems were historically there. And then there's also, I'm so bad at remembering names, but there's also like a list of like plant communities. Like you can literally find up like a grouping of plants that are found within a community, and it will give you all that information in one condensed like presentation or PDF file.
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is probably the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. They have those. I'll put that in the chat for people to see. So they have a description of each ecosystem, and then I just posted in the chat for very basic information, and recommendations on like natural communities to go visit, parks to go visit. We have our Good Citizen guides, which are set for every region of the state. And then on our Teespring site, our online store, we also have posters available for each region with landscaping. And I'll post those two links in the chat as soon as I am done talking because I cannot talk and type at the same time. And there's also our FNPS, we have a plant finder. And so even though that doesn't it just produces a list of plants for you to look at. It's, you have to kind of look through the plants yourself, but you can put, dry, sun, shade. Do you want it to be spiky? Do you not want it to be spiky? Butterfly host plant. And it will shoot out a list of plants that meet your criteria for your particular space. So, actually, let me just native plants, find for landscaping. So I'm going to drag it over on top of us right here. So you can see we have this interface here, and this is like everything on the list, right? And the little hearts indicate what's really nice, like what we really like for landscaping. And then if you go back up to the top, you can see find a specific plant. You can search by species or find plants based on your location and needs. And yes, this is a work in progress. We're working on it. Zip code's not there yet. You cannot search by zone yet, but the county search is working. Full sun, soil, water, salt spray, cultivation goals, hummingbirds, that kind of thing. Go to town. So how can people get a hold of you?
So all my information, email, my phone number, my website. I'm very active on checking my email address mainly. So if you want to contact me, you have like a few questions or you need a consultation or you want me to do a design or anything like that, you can just directly contact me through my email. That's the best way.
Awesome. All right, I think I've covered, let me just check my notes to make sure I covered all of the questions. Yep. Okay. So yeah, if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me, communications@fnps.org, or follow up with Jordan if you prefer. With that, our next Lunch and Learn will be at the end of the month, which if I could pull up my calendar, I could tell you what day that is. That will be the 28th, and we'll be discussing the upcoming legislative session and sort of recent activism and work with the Florida excursionist, Ryan Worthington, who's been working on a lot of stuff with the Florida Springs Council. He's been active with us, the Florida Native Plant Society, and so obviously we've had Gene on a lot. Gene is our president and our policy guy, and so we're going to be expanding a bit to talk more about sort of the environmental community as a whole, working together to mostly prevent bad things from happening in Florida from a legislative perspective, but yeah, so please join us, same time, noon Eastern, Friday, the end of the month. So thank you again, Jordan. It was lovely. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a fun slideshow. That's not even the finalized version.
Well, maybe some of our chapters will we can do like a speaking tour.
I didn't realize this. It took the full hour to do the presentation. Oh wait, yeah, your time has come to finally be a butterfly.